Good afternoon, everybody. This may be as frustrating for me as for you. I have been in Spain for the week before this, and I've spent 2 weeks saying, no hablo español, I think with an Andalusian accent. And now I can't even speak English. I'm losing my voice. My wife suggested that I perform my presentation in the form of interpretive dance. But over here in the Caribbean coast, I don't think you need to see an Englishman doing interpretive dance. My wife is in a wheelchair and she can still dance better than me. So we'll persevere with plan A. Can you just about hear me with the microphone? Is it okay? We'll see how it goes. I've worked in electricity market design for 25 years. I've worked in different countries, in different continents. And one thing I've learned is that there is no perfect market design. Any market design must suit the country that you're in at the state of liberalization and maturity that you're in. So anything that I tell you from another country, you must take with a pinch of salt. But here are the things I can bring you on the development of non-traditional business models in the UK context. And the UK was the first market in Europe to liberalize in 1990. I got involved when we did the second reform and we took out version 1.0 of the market, which was the old-fashioned engineering systems, central dispatch, central control, mandatory markets, and we created a much more liberalized version 2.0 market design, where we have continuous traded markets. The buyers and the sellers come together in a series of voluntary markets to form prices. And I believe it's a far superior system for the mature markets that we have in Europe. Whether it's relevant to Colombia today, that's a decision for you. But it has unlocked a huge amount of demand-side flexibility and participation in ways that I would never have believed possible. If I'd been talking to you 10 years ago and you'd been advising about market liberalization, I would have said, you know, the retail stuff, that doesn't add much value. But now it adds an unbelievable amount of value to a renewables-led system. So let me tell you, I won't go through all of the slides, but let me tell you a bit about the story that we've got about non-traditional business models. So the agenda is, you know, why the business models are changing, and that's ultimately because the system is changing. How is it changing? Some examples of the non-traditional business models and how they come about, and my rudimentary attempt to apply some of this to the Colombian context based on my 3 days in the country and the support of my colleagues who are based here. So Britain is at the forefront of the decarbonisation of its power system. We started with a coal-led system with nuclear. We developed gas because we had very cheap gas that we discovered in the North Sea. So our transition from coal to gas was actually both a political thing, with Margaret Thatcher's government trying to fight the coal mining unions, but also commercially expedient because we had a glut of cheap gas. So the first part was easy. Last month we closed our last coal plant, so we now have 0 coal in the UK. But a gas-led system isn't so different to a coal system. But over the last decade, we've been ramping up our renewables. We now have roughly 40% of our energy from renewables, which is predominantly wind, a little solar. We have some DC interconnections, so we manage the system frequency on the island. And I won't dwell on all of the developments of the gigawatts of capacities, but we are still fundamentally driven by gas prices. So for years, energy was a non-political subject, but with the gas price caused by Putin's adventure in Ukraine, it's the phrase I heard yesterday, the whole politicization of the energy price has become very relevant. One of the forms of non-traditional business model that we're developing quickly is the deployment of batteries. So we have a 55 gigawatt system. We've already deployed nearly 4 gigawatts of batteries, and we're looking to deploy 14 or 15 in the next 2 or 3 years. Now, if you think batteries are the antidote to renewable intermittency, you should think again. The studies we've done of the system in Britain, a scarcity event today, on average, lasts for 4 hours. By 2035, 2040, the average duration of a scarcity event is 40 hours, 40 hours. So batteries don't have much of a contribution to that security of supply. And if you look on the chart, the line, I don't think the cursor, yeah, there you go, the line. That is the volume of ancillary services that we need batteries for. So you can very quickly saturate the market for batteries. And they're monetizing all kinds of other services, but it's not the short-term flexibility services. So Britain has a carbon target to get to zero carbon as an economy by 2050, but the incoming government committed to net zero power by 2030, which in electric terms is effectively tomorrow. So they have hugely ambitious plans for the further deployment of renewables, especially offshore wind. They are looking to launch some kind of support mechanism for longer duration storage. We will have way too much short duration storage. And looking at the scenarios that are being developed to meet this 2030 target, the system operator issued some just this week. They're looking at, to get the longer duration storage, new technologies such as hydrogen, and even including hydrogen back into power generation, and also carbon capture and storage. And we are a very well interconnected country, and interconnection is hugely important in getting diversity from different renewable resources. We're undergoing a fundamental reform of the market arrangements, I think for the 4th time, and they started by looking at everything: the renewable support regimes, the capacity support regime, the form of trading. They even considered going back in time to central dispatch with nodal pricing, which I would say is market design 1.1. But thankfully, we're not going down the route of nodal pricing. They're still considering zonal pricing, which is probably a good thing. They're also still considering central dispatch, which is probably a bad thing, because the flexibility of the future comes from distributed resources, and it's not clear how you can centrally dispatch that scale of small resources. So this model, I think, applies to any market which is deploying renewables to decarbonize. It's getting warm in here. So the first thing is location. We're putting renewable resources, and we're also electrifying things. So transport, we're using heat pumps now. So we're putting a lot of demand capacity at the lowest voltage levels. So we're putting huge pressure both on transmission and distribution grids. We're designing even our distribution grids now for congestion. So we're deploying congestion management markets even at the distribution level. And anybody, I showed you that the batteries are saturating the ancillary service markets. The only way that flexible resources can make money is by stacking revenue from a whole stream of different markets, and that includes local distribution markets. So the first challenge, and this is wherever you are on the pathway to renewables, is challenges around location. The second one is about balancing and stability, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. But the fundamental challenge of maintaining the system frequency and the energy supply balance in the face of weather-dependent renewables is becoming a challenge. That one is relatively easy to manage, and we can talk about it. But we're even seeing problems with system inertia. So as we take off the synchronous generation and replace it with DC assets, and our interconnection is DC, We're having to create markets for inertia and system stability. And the other fundamental change that comes out when you introduce renewables at scale to any market is that the risk patterns completely change. So we're not just dealing with price risk, we're dealing with volume risk. And most of the traded markets don't really have tools to deal with that level of risk. So in many of the European markets, which were energy-only markets, and the European interconnected system uses the spot prices to determine the flows of energy across all of the boundaries. Many of those energy-only markets have gone, in my view, backwards in time and introduced capacity subsidies because the level of risk in the renewables-led market was too great to get investment at sensible prices. And we've seen stories about this today already. High incidence of negative prices. Actually, that's not just caused by renewables, it's caused by badly designed subsidy schemes for renewables where they only get paid for the megawatt hours and they are willing to accept a negative price in the wholesale market because they're getting a subsidy. So we're working on designs for renewable support which prevent driving negative prices. So be careful in just copying support schemes that have been used elsewhere. So in summary, the business models have to change to respond to decarbonisation goals. We will be deploying new technologies and they have to find new ways of making money. So the transition path, you will have heard this phrase already. The decarbonisation is built on decentralisation and on digitalisation. And the thing I'd like to emphasise is we think that decentralisation means generation. And that might be true when what we're doing is putting solar panels and small-scale wind farms on distribution networks. But we're now building gigawatt-scale offshore wind and grid-scale solar. It's not so much that the sources of generation are decentralising, but the tools for flexibility are being decentralised. And that's what fundamentally changes the nature of the markets in the system operation. And it can only be achieved with a high degree of digitalisation to coordinate these various assets. So again, you will have seen pictures like this many times. The traditional system is a linear system from large, remote, centralised generation to dispersed, distributed demands. If you have a problem with a section of the network, you cut off what's at the bottom of it. There's no generation down there. It doesn't look like that anymore. Many regions have enough generation to maintain reliability, even if there's a short circuit of the network. So we're looking at a much more diverse physical system, and the business models that go with that are also incredibly diverse. So in Britain, we have smart meters. There's a business model for meter asset providers. So people like Macquarie own millions of meters. There's a model for owning offshore transmission networks. So we've diversified the ownership roles and the operation roles even of the existing infrastructure like transmission and metering. But we've got a huge diversity once you move towards the trading, the aggregation and the retail level. So as an example, I've got an electric car. It consumes as much energy as my house in electrical terms. I would be completely mad if I just consumed energy in my car on a flat tariff. I can save 75% of the cost of the electricity for my car by having a smart tariff and by charging overnight. And I don't have a smart car or a smart charger. It's all manual. But I still get messages every so often saying there's free energy between 1 and 2 p.m. tomorrow. And that's when I would top up my car. I'm also part of a scheme where in the winter, and we have a winter peak demand, where there's a demand flexibility service, which is a paid service by the grid operator. And you get a message saying, please reduce your energy between 6 and 7 p.m. today. And if you can cut your consumption, you get paid for that. So the diversity of resources that we're getting to be active in balancing the system is quite incredible. We're doing a study for the UK government now on the value of vehicle to grid to the UK system. So as I said, the average duration of a scarcity event will become 40 hours. Now my car can do 40 hours. I need to charge 10 hours any time in the week. That's fine for me. But I can re-inject energy into the grid for up to 6 hours just with the car I have parked in my driveway. So some other examples of the non-traditional business models. So this is just looking at the need for flexibility over different time frames. So I'll start at the bottom. You'll be familiar with this in a hydro-led system, the need for seasonal balancing from, the period when there's high levels of water in the reservoirs flowing and the times when it's less available. They have the same problem in the Nordics. We will have that problem in parts of Europe where we use solar energy in the summer for the heating of our homes in the winter. And there are some long-term storage being developed there, but that's actually the least mature of everything. That's where we start to talk about hydrogen. In Denmark, they're experimenting with injecting heat into rocks and then extracting the heat for district heating later in the winter. So these longer duration storages are actually still quite new and very immature. The next one up is the one a lot of people will be familiar with. Have you got enough megawatts to meet the next peak demand? And in the old days, that was just for a short period of time, but as I've said, it's becoming a longer duration. We need intraday flexibility to deal with the ramping of wind and of solar, and I guess you're all familiar with the Californian duck curve. But we're increasingly needing real-time stability that used to be provided by the synchronous generation. But as we squeeze that synchronous generation from the system, we're starting to have to deploy new technologies to provide that stability. So we did a design for the National Grid system operator in Britain for a stability market. It includes long-term procurement, which allows people to invest in things like synchronous condensers and grid-forming technology at the converter stations for their batteries and their wind farms. So we're looking at a combination of long-term, medium, and even day-ahead procurement of these services. So instead of all of these services being provided as a byproduct of having a gas plant with a pipe, we're having to create new market products that incentivize investment in these new technologies and also the efficient deployment of these technologies. And batteries can stack revenues across a series of these. So National Grid ESO, actually we nationalized them at the beginning of October. So the system operator was privatized in 1990, but they renationalized the system operation part of it at the beginning of last month. One of the first products that they launched, deliberately targeted to get batteries onto the system, was an extra fast response product. So the traditional definition of ancillary services and frequency response services, people talk about having technology neutral product definitions. That's rubbish, it doesn't exist. The standard definitions of frequency response products are basically the things that a turbine can do when you open the steam governor, or when you put more gas or more coal in. So primary, secondary, reserve, they're not technology neutral products. So we're starting to create a series of different types of frequency support products that allow new types of technology to operate effectively. At a European level, we're starting to see the development of local flexibility markets, which allow flexible resources connect to the distribution level to help to manage distribution level congestion. And you may think distribution level congestion doesn't make any sense, but if you think we're installing car chargers at every home, it makes zero sense for those cars to be charging at the same time as the evening peak of the household consumption. So we have to find ways of smoothing out the household load. So that's congestion management. And National Grid ESO has got a series of varying degrees of maturity system services that allow participation of distributed energy resources. So this is just a few of them. The fourth one, I think, is the most important, maybe the fifth one. We have a regulation system in Britain which incentivizes grid owners to buy flexibility services or to build assets. They don't have a capex-heavy incentive regime. They have incentives to go out and find alternatives to grid build if that's the most effective solution. They were also given very strong incentives for innovation funding to go out and find new methods to operate the grid. So the incentive regime on the grid operators at transmission and at distribution level is absolutely crucial. The other one is smart metering. Our smart metering program was a failure at the beginning, but it's becoming a real success. So we've rolled out smart meters. The intention is to have them in 95% of homes. Some people won't have one for various reasons. But once you get smart metering, we made the mistake of not using the meter reads in the settlement at the wholesale level, but that's now being rectified. So we could talk about the detail of that if anybody's interested over a beer later. But having smart metering with half-hourly settlement and having grid operators who have real incentives to find innovative solutions to system balancing underpins a lot of the innovation that we've developed. Let me apply a little bit of this to the Colombian situation as I see it. So you have your Energy National Plan with 2050 targets, and there are some national level government commitments, and I don't want to get into the politics of that and kind of the credibility of the plans that we have or the consistency with them, with the longer term commitments. I think all I will say is every country is on a journey. Many of them may not meet the times of the targets that they say, but as long as the direction of travel is clear and the regulatory framework is consistent, they will get there maybe a little later than the original plan. So, again, hydrogen. Personally, I'm a bit of a hydrogen skeptic. What I've seen is that my countries decarbonize when it's economically convenient to do so, and decarbonizing against the economics is quite tough. But I also see a lot of desire, particularly by big commercial and industrial consumers, to decarbonize their supply chains. So I'm working on a project at the moment. You may be familiar with the concept of clean energy certificates, green certificates, and generally the accounting for those is on an annual basis. So if your consumption over a year can be matched with green certificates over the year, you can count your electricity consumption as carbon neutral. Now, I think we all know that that's bullshit. You are not consuming solar energy at night, however many certificates you waive. And the expectations of many of the large consumers are moving beyond that. So we're doing a study looking at 24/7 clean energy matching, and certainly the big tech companies. And I know that data centers are going to be a big part of your future demand. Google has committed that every kilowatt hour they buy by 2030 will be matched 24/7 with production. So for me, and we're also seeing voluntary purchase of carbon offsets by corporates who are looking to decarbonize their supply chains for their consumers and for their financial stakeholders. So it is those moves that will perhaps allow hydrogen and green hydrogen to come into the market once we see that there's a willingness to pay on behalf of the consumers. And certainly for commercial and industrial consumers, it is not a problem about the absolute cost of energy. What matters is the relative cost of energy compared to your competitors. And I'm well aware that there are many, many vulnerable consumers for whom the absolute cost of energy is a very serious issue. But we need cost reflectivity to the wider part of the market to get the innovations that we need. So I won't dwell on the plans for the growth of renewable capacity. I had a few meetings in Bogota with various agencies before I came here to Cartagena. I was using Google Translate to catch up with the conversation, so you can imagine the quality of the translation and what percentage of the conversation I really understood yesterday and today. But I did get this. There's a lot of emphasis on energy communities and on the communities through whom the infrastructure is being built. This government, at the least, has got the permission for the La Guajira line. It probably won't happen in time for the politics of this government, but that seems to be a major breakthrough. And what I was told was they have been able to develop within the government the interdepartmental coordination, but also at the community level, the consultation coordination to unlock the offshore wind potential. Whether they're doing it well and whether they're doing it fast enough, I couldn't begin to judge, but those were independent comments that I was getting from agencies and the meetings in Bogota. So it's not all bad news. There are some positive steps. The digitalization is a key underpinning of the transition that we need to make. And I would start by saying from an industry perspective, it's an attractive proposition to solve all of the problems with supply side technologies. We'll build some synchronous condensers, we'll build some batteries. But that only takes you far in a renewable-led system. It only takes you so far unless you have flexible demand as well to complement the inflexibility of the renewable production. It starts to become very expensive very quickly. Data centers with baseload compared to data centers with some extra cooling capacity, which allows them to be flexible on the timing of their consumption. They have completely different cost implications for the wider power system. And we are electrifying types of load, certainly in Europe, that have huge flexibility baked into them. So my car has enough storage for 8 days in my house, but people are building heat pumps and electrifying heating, and buildings have an inherent thermal storage. So there's a lot of flexibility potential in the new technologies that we're deploying if we get it right. So just some quick lessons. Get the regulatory frameworks on the network operators right to incentivize new ways of doing things and innovation. And if anybody's been involved in innovation, not everything succeeds. You have to be prepared for failures, and the regulatory regime has to enable failures. If you don't make any mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. So that level of innovation has to be ingrained. Bureaucracy, and here it's about getting the permitting right, cooperation between all of the relevant stakeholders, and underpinning this all with digitalization. So there are some strategic actions that the utilities and the industrial players and the governments can take. And I think I will step back from trying to give advice to a country that I've been in for 3 days. The digitalization is a critical building block of this. And so we need to have a proper roadmap. We need to have advanced analytics at key points on the network, and we move to a digital and operational transformation. And we heard earlier today about some of the tools that can be deployed. It's not sensible or feasible to roll out smart meters immediately in a country like Colombia, but a targeted deployment to the right types of load could be very beneficial. And flexibility is still the watchword, but we have to recognize that if you build flexible resources, they need to get revenue from a whole different set of streams. So wholesale market, and while I've been here, I've been hearing about the proposed moves to unlock intraday trading, because day-ahead trading doesn't value flexibility. There need to be market timeframes after that to allow the flexible resources to be able to respond to changes. There should be developed transmission system services, paid ancillary services that the flexible resources can access, and also looking at how we manage the distribution networks and whether there's a role for flexibility to avoid the need for expensive distribution grid build. Flexibility has been a battle. It's complex. The participation rules often favor supply-side solutions, and that's a costly outcome, and you really have to push the network companies to look for non-conventional solutions. A lot of the providers of this flexibility are global international companies. So if BMW is putting vehicle-to-grid capability in its cars, it doesn't want a different protocol for every country or even every distribution network. There has to be some harmonization of some of these providers, and there have to be incentives on the network companies. My time's up and my voice is up, so I won't go through all of this, but innovation-driven regulation, incentives across the whole market to support decarbonization. And this is more important in Colombia than anywhere I've seen, community and industry involvement and locally rooted solutions. And that's part of delivering a flexible, resilient system. And I loved the conversation earlier by the woman from AFRY about the nature of resilience. And it's about understanding the consequences of not supplying energy to different types of loads at different times. But the consequence of not supplying load to my electric car in the system peak are basically zero. So we need to look at the whole system about reliability. We need to distinguish between consumers' needs, consumers' preferences, consumers' wishes, and consumers' I can't really be bothered. And the future energy system is no longer about supply matching demand. It's very much about demand matching supply as well. And that's the only way we can decarbonize cost effectively. So I'd like to end on that note. Thank you very much for your time.